Hello, listening squirrels. I look a sight. Yesterday's makeup on. No earrings, but look at my beautiful sissy's cowl. Isn't it gorgeous? It's so sparkly. I think she made it with the shawl and a ball or cake. I think this colorway is Namaste. Nah, I'm going to stay home. Anywho, let's get to our reading. We are at chapter 15 of The Murder at the Vicarage. Hall's appearance distressed me very much. His hands were shaking and his face kept twitching nervously. In my opinion, he should have been in bed, and I told him so. He insisted he was perfectly well. I assure you, sir, I never felt better, never in my life. This was so obviously wide of the truth that I hardly knew how to answer. I have a certain admiration for a man who will not give in to illness, but Halls was carrying the thing rather too far. My candles are... Supposed to get new batteries tomorrow, new rechargeables. Now I can't find my charger. Say, Sissy, what did you do, Lindsay? Oh, with my charger. Okay, here we go. Rather too far. I called to tell you how sorry I was that such a thing should happen in the vicarage. Yes, I said, it's not very pleasant. It's terrible, quite terrible. It seems they haven't arrested Mr. Redding after all. No, that was a mistake. He made a rather foolish statement. And the police are now quite convinced that he's innocent? Perfectly. Why is that, may I ask? Do they suspect anyone else? I should never have suspected that Halls would take such a keen interest in the details of a murder case. Perhaps it's because it happened in the vicarage. He appeared as eager as a reporter. I don't know that I'm completely in Inspector Slack's confidence. As far as I know, he does not suspect anyone in particular. He is at present engaged in making inquiries. Yes, of course, but who can one imagine doing such a dreadful thing? I shook my head. Colonel Prothero was not a popular man, I know that, but murder? For murder, one would need a very strong motive. So I should imagine, I said. Who could have had such a motive? Have the police any idea? I couldn't say. He might have made enemies, you know. The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that he was the kind of man to have enemies. He had a reputation on the bench for being very severe. I suppose he had. Why, don't you remember, sir, he was telling you yesterday morning about having been threatened by that man Archer? Now I come to think of it, so he did, I said. Of course I remember. You were quite near us at the time. Yes, I overheard what he was saying. Almost impossible to help it with Colonel Prothero. He's such a very loud voice, hadn't he? He had. I remember being impressed by your words, but when his time came, he might have justice meted out to him instead of mercy. Did I say that? I asked, frowning. My remembrance of my own words are slightly different. You said it very impressively, sir. I was struck by your words. Justice is a terrible thing. And to think the poor man was struck down shortly afterwards, it's almost as though you had a premonition. I had nothing of the sort, I said shortly. I rather dislike Hall's tendency to mysticism. There is a touch of the visionary about him. Have you told the police about this man Archer, sir? I know nothing about him. Have you repeated to them what Colonel Prothero said about Archer having threatened him? No, I said slowly, I have not. But you're going to do so? I was silent. I dislike hounding a man down who has already got the forces of law and order against him. I held no brief for Archer. He is an inveterate poacher, one of those cheerful ne'er-do-wells that are to be found in any parish, whatever he may have said in the heat of anger when he was sentenced. I had no definite knowledge that he felt the same when he came out of prison. You heard the conversation, I said at last. If you feel it your duty to go to the police with it, you must do so. It would come out better for you, sir. Perhaps, but to tell the truth, well, I've no fancy for doing it. I might be helping to put the rope round the neck of an innocent man. But if he shot Colonel Prothero, if there's no evidence of any kind that he did. His threats, strictly speaking, the threats were not his but Colonel Prothero's. Colonel Prothero was threatening to show Archer what vengeance was worth next time he caught him. I don't understand your attitude, sir, don't you? I said wearily. You're a young man. You're zealous in the cause of right. When you get to my age, you'll find that you'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt. It's not, he paused and I looked at him in surprise. You haven't any idea of your own as to the identity of the murderer, Good heavens, no. Halls persisted. Or as to the motive? No. Have you? No, indeed. I just wondered if Colonel Prothero had confided in you anyway, mentioned anything. His confidences, such as they were heard by the whole village street yesterday morning, I said dryly. Yes, of course, and you don't think about Archer? The people will know all about Archer soon enough, I said. If I heard him threaten Colonel Prothero myself, that would be a different matter. But you may be sure that if he actually has threatened him, half the people in the village will have heard him, and the news will get to the police all right. You, of course, must do as you like about the matter. But Hall seemed curiously unwilling to do anything himself. The man's whole attitude was nervous and queer. I recalled what Haydock had said about his illness. There, I suppose, lay the explanation. He took his leave unwillingly, as though he had more to say and didn't know how to say it. Before he left, I arranged with him to take the service for the Mothers' Union, followed by the meeting of district visitors. I had several projects of my own for the afternoon. Dismissing Halls and his troubles from my mind, I started off for Mrs. Lestrange. On the table in the hall lay the Guardian and the Church Times unopened. I remembered that Mrs. Lestrange had had an interview with Colonel Prothero the night before his death. It was possible that something had transpired in that interview which would throw light upon the problem of his murder. I was shown straight into the little drawing room, and Mrs. Lestrange rose to meet me. I was struck anew by the marvelous atmosphere that this woman could create. She wore a dress of some dead black material, material that showed off the extraordinary fairness of her skin. There was something curiously dead about her face. Only the eyes were burning alive. There was a watchful look in them today. Otherwise, she showed no signs of animation. Yes, it was very good of you to come, Mr. Clement, she said as she shook hands. I wanted to speak to you the other day, then I decided not to do so. I was wrong. As I told you then, I shall be glad to do anything I can to help you. Yes, you said that, and you said it as though you meant it. Very few people, Mr. Clement, in this world have ever sincerely wished to help me. I can hardly believe that, Mrs. Lestrange. It's true. Most people, most men at any rate, are out for their own hand. There was a bitterness in her voice. I did not answer, and she went on. Sit down, won't you? I obeyed, and she took a chair facing me. She hesitated a moment and then began to speak very slowly and thoughtfully, seeming to weigh each word as she uttered it. I'm in a very peculiar position, Mr. Clement, and I want to ask your advice. That is, I want to ask your advice as to what I should do next. What is past and cannot be undone, you understand. Before I could reply, the maid who had admitted me opened the door and said with a sacred face, Oh, please, ma'am, there's a police inspector here, and he says he must speak to you, please. There was a pause. Mrs. Lestrange's face did not change, only her eyes were slowly closed and opened again. She seemed to swallow once or twice, then she said in exactly the same clear, calm voice, Show him in, Hilda. I was about to rise, but she motioned me back again with an imperious hand. If you do not mind, I should be much obliged if you would stay. I returned to my seat. Certainly, if you wish it, I murmured, as Slack entered with a brisk regulation tread. Good afternoon, madam, he began. Good afternoon, Inspector. At this moment he caught sight of me and scowled. There's no doubt about that. Slack does not like me. You have no objection to the vicar's presence, I hope? I suppose that Slack could not very well say he had. No, he said grudgingly, though perhaps it might be better. Mrs. Lestrange paid no attention to the hint. What can I do for you, Inspector? She asked. It's this way, madam. Murder of Colonel Prothero. I'm in charge of the case and making inquiries. Mrs. Lestrange nodded. Just as a matter of form, I'm asking every one just where they were yesterday evening between the hours of 6 and 7 p.m. Just as a matter of form, you understand. You want to know where I was yesterday evening between 6 and 7. If you please, madam, let me see. She reflected a moment. I was here, in this house. Oh, I saw the inspector's eyes flash. And your maid? You have only one maid, I think. Can confirm that statement? No, it was Hilda's afternoon out. I see. So unfortunately you will have to take my word for it, said Mrs. Lestrange pleasantly. You seriously declare that you were at home all the afternoon? You said between 6 and 7, Inspector, and I was out for a walk early in the afternoon. I returned sometime before 5 o'clock. Then, if a lady, Miss Hartnell, for instance, were to declare that she came here about 6 o'clock, rang the bell but could make no one hear and was compelled to go away again, you'd say she was mistaken, eh? Oh, no, Mrs. Lestrange shook her head, but if your maid is in, if your maid is in, she can say not at home. If one is alone and does not happen to want to see callers, where the only thing to do is to let them ring. Inspector Slack looked slightly baffled. Elderly women bore me dreadfully, said Mrs. Lestrange, and Miss Hartnell is particularly boring. She must have rung at least half a dozen times before she went away. Went away. She smiled sweetly at Inspector Slack. The inspector shifted his ground. Then if anyone were to say they'd seen you out and about then, oh, but they didn't, did they? She was quick to sense his weak point. No one saw me out, because I was in, you see. Quite so, madam. The inspector hitched his chair a little nearer. Now I understand, Mrs. Lestrange, that you paid a visit to Colonel Prothero at Old Hall the night before his death. Mrs. Lestrange said calmly, "That's so. Can you indicate to me the nature of that interview?" "It concerned a private matter, Inspector. I'm afraid I must ask you to tell me the nature of the private matter." "I shall not tell you anything of the kind. I will only assure you that nothing which was said at that interview could possibly have any bearing upon the crime. I don't think you're the best judge of that. At any rate, you will have to take my word for it, Inspector." "In fact, I have to take your word about everything." "It does seem rather like it," she agreed, still with the same smiling calm. Inspector Slack grew very red. "This is a serious matter, Mrs. Lestrange. I want the truth." He banged his fist down on the table. "And I mean to get it." Mrs. Lestrange said nothing at all. "Don't you see, madam, that you're putting yourself in a very fishy position?" Still Mrs. Lestrange said nothing. "You'll be required to give evidence at the request." "Yes." Just the monosyllable, unempathetic, uninterested. The inspector altered his tactics. "You were acquainted with Colonel Prothero?" "Yes, I was acquainted with him." "Well acquainted?" There was a pause before she said, "I had seen him for several years." "If you were acquainted with Mr. Prothero..." "No, you were acquainted with Mrs. Not seen him for several years." Oh, sorry. I skipped ahead. I'm so sorry. "You were acquainted with Colonel Prothero?" "Yes, I was acquainted with him." "Well acquainted?" There was a pause before she said it. "I had not seen him for several years." "You were acquainted with Mrs. Prothero?" "No." "You'll excuse me, but it was very unusual. It was a very unusual time to make a call." "Not from my point of view." "What do you mean by that?" "I wanted to see Colonel Prothero alone. I did not want to see Mrs. Prothero or Mrs. Prothero or Miss Prothero. I consider this the best way of accomplishing my object." "Why didn't you want to see Mrs. or Miss Prothero?" "Don't you see, madam, that you're putting yourself in a..." This is the same thing. Okay, wait a minute. Why didn't you want to see? Okay. "That, Inspector, is my business." "Then you refuse to say more?" "Absolutely." Inspector Slack rose. "You'll be putting yourself in a nasty position, madam, if you're not careful. All this looks bad. It looks very bad." She laughed. I could have told Inspector Slack that this was not the kind of woman who is easily frightened. "Well," I said, extricating myself with dignity, "don't say I haven't warned you, that's all. Good afternoon, madam, and mind you were going to get at the truth." He departed. Mrs. Lestrange rose and held out her hand. "I'm going to send you away. Yes, it is better so. You see, it's too late for advice now. I have chosen my part." She repeated in a rather forlorn voice, "I have chosen my part." That's it for 15. And I would read 16, but I'm reading myself to sleep. Stumbling over stuff. I gotta get in here and do this earlier in the day. Sorry about that, but almost 20 minutes. Sorry for that close up. I'll look a little better tomorrow, I hope, live at 5. All right, I found a long lost whip. Well, not long lost, but it's got quite a bit done on it, so I need to keep on working on it. Have the yuckiest taste in my mouth, so I have to do this. Love y'all. Kelly's. Kelly, Kelli. Kelly's Crochet Adventures is coming on. If she does like she usually does, at 7:05 tonight. So I might be there if I'm not asleep. Might be up on panel or in a chat. Love y'all. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. Bye-bye.